Hello everyone, this is Angela and welcome to my channel. Please be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and hit the notifications bell so that you will know whenever I upload any new content. In a previous video about polygamy, particularly polygyny, we used a visual model to explore the impact of this practice on the gene pool of a population. Please be sure to watch the video so that you can have insight on how the gene pool is bottlenecked as a result of polygynous marriages. In today's video, we will explore the economic impact of polygamy on a society. Here are some disclaimers. Feel free to pause the video and read them for yourself. For those of you who are still here, thank you for your support. Now let's get into it. So here's the population that those of you who watched the previous video will be familiar with. This is the 50 color-coded and genetically diverse people, a community of 25 men and 25 women who are each in monogamous relationships with one another. Okay, so like before, let's go to the first 10 couples so that we can simplify this presentation. You see, this represents a small neighborhood. And also, let's give them their names by alphabet letters, so that'll also help to keep things organized. Same as before, you have the A family, the B family, the C's, the D's, the E's, and so forth. Okay, now let's go to our favorite family, the A's, and let's look at what it looks like on a household level. So we have the red man here, Mr. A. He has a career where he earns a salary of $100,000 per year. His wife, Mrs. A, is working part-time and earning about $50,000 annually. Their shared income amount per household is $150,000. And listen, I know that in reality, the financials can be far more complex, that for a household to have access to at least $150,000 after taxes, it means that the actual income would need to be closer to $200,000. Trust me, I know. But for the sake of simplicity, we will stick to the straight line math in these examples, okay? So back to the A household. We're going to fast forward a little bit and say that now Mr. and Mrs. A are parents. They have 2 children. We'll just call them little girl A and little boy A, or basically the A kids, okay? We will keep the income at the same $150,000 per year in the home. So let's see what the average income is per person by taking $150,000 and dividing it by the 4 family members. That gives an average of $37,500 per person each year. So what does all of this mean and why is it important to understand? Okay, the average cost to raise a child in the United States is approximately $275,000 from birth to the age of 18. This does not include the cost of college tuition, by the way. Raising a child is like having to pay for a house in 18 years. And if you're anything like me, $275,000 seems like some far off and unrelatable figure. So here's a breakdown of what it means in terms that most people like myself can relate to. Okay, the average cost to raise a child will be above $15,000 a year, $15,277.78 to be precise. The annual cost of raising a child is similar to having to buy a used car every single year. And not one from the junkyard. I'm talking about a real decent one that has roadside assistance and a warranty. That kind of a car every year. This will be approximately $1,273.15 per month, which is like paying the typical rent on a 2-bedroom apartment. And it'll also cost $41.86 per day on average, which in today's economy is equal to about a tank of gas a day in a small car, or less than half of a tank in a pickup truck or an SUV. Now, to be fair, the majority of the costs, approximately 40% of the cost of raising children, is going to revolve around housing. However, the next largest expense with raising children, about 30% of it, is going to be the cost of food. I'm sure that there are parents who can attest to this, especially if they have a house filled with boys that are randomly going through growth spurts. Girls are expensive too now. They cost more as they get older. And parents of multiples have multiplied expenses. You see, I feel myself about to go on a major tangent here, so I'm trying to keep this video brief. So let's get back to the A household and their budget. So back to the numbers. We have $150,000 divided by 4 people. That gives us $37,500 per person. Now, okay, this is a visual example using an unemotional, matter-of-fact, and scientific method that is intended to demonstrate how a theory works out, right? So let's assume that both Mr. and Mrs. A use their full portion of the $37,500 each year. So what we're going to do is multiply that by 2, and that gives us $75,000 that is being used out of the $150,000 so far. That means that this leaves $75,000 left over to take care of the expenses of little boy A and little girl A. Well, each of them only need roughly $15,000 per year. So we're going to multiply that $15,000 by 2, which is $30,000. And let's go a little bit further. We're going to add the $75,000 of Mr. and Mrs. A's expenses to the $30,000 of the A children's expenses. And the expense for the A household for the year is going to be a total of $105,000. Well, their income for the year is $150,000. This means that there is $45,000 left over that has yet to be spent. So what we see happening here is that there is more money left over than what was needed for the household to operate. This leftover money, $45,000 of it, is known as a surplus. So with extra money, we see that there are a lot of opportunities for the A family. The $45,000 surplus equals to more than $11,000 of extra money per person. In these circumstances, there is more than enough money left over to take family vacations, to make contributions into college and retirement funds, to afford extra car payments, to be able to afford home and car repairs, to have funds to set aside for weddings, graduations, for estate planning, such as funerals. Yes, that is a cost in life, and so forth. The surplus can fund extracurricular activities for the children, which will help them to develop their talents, where they can even earn scholarships, or at least at a bare minimum, have a way to earn additional income when they grow up to become adults. So let's entertain what it's like for this neighborhood where each household is operating with an income of $150,000 annually. So we're going to go back to the different households, and each of these households have a surplus of $45,000. I'm about to sound a bit technical here for a moment, so let's get into it. So we have 10 households in the neighborhood, and each is earning $150,000 in income. That equals to $1.5 million community dollars per year. Let's fast forward a decade, and that equates to $15 million over the course of 10 years. Let's even go a step further and say that for 2 decades, or roughly the amount of time that it takes to raise a child, this community has generated, or would have generated, $30 million. When we look at what it takes as far as an income surplus, that's $45,000 per house times 10 homes, which is $450,000 for the community each year. 10 years of a surplus equals $4.5 million. 20 years, it'll be $9 million of surplus or extra money. That's 10 households with 4 people residing in each of them. So that's a total of 40 people who are splitting $23 million over the course of 2 decades, or basically the childhood of each child, with a significant portion of the funds, about $9 million, as a surplus to the community. This means that a portion of the $450,000 per year, or $9 million over 20 years, can be put towards creating and maintaining shared spaces such as roads, bridges, public transportation, schools, libraries, hospitals, parks, or developing commercial real estate like your malls, skyscrapers, and so forth. So as a result, communities that are monogamous tend to be highly developed, more technologically advanced, and have a greater degree of economic stability. Now, let's pause for a moment here and give some clarity. I am not at all implying that urbanization equals monogamy and rural life equals non-monogamy. The rural areas in America especially are highly dependent on technology for everything, including agriculture, dairy, and poultry farming, and so forth. However, if you compare the rural areas of monogamous societies to the rural areas of societies that are not monogamous, then you will quickly see what I meant earlier by monogamous societies tend to be more developed and more technologically advanced, and also in high need of professionals with specialized skills, such as those that are gained in a college setting. The tendency of monogamous societies being advanced is without regard to whether or not the setting is urban or rural. I just wanted to make sure that is clear. Now we have covered the visualization of the monogamous community based on what will be typical. Okay, we will now cover the polygamous community. If you watched my previous video, you will be a bit familiar with this visual. Okay, this is a community where they believe that a man needs to have at least 4 wives to be considered a normal man. As you can see from the visual, there are 5 men on the left, and to the right, each of them have met the minimum 4-wife quota. Well, also in this community, to be considered a normal woman, every woman's goal is to become a housewife. So the wives in this community do not work income-producing jobs. Want to be very careful and not perpetuate a stereotype that housewives do not work. Being a housewife in general is very labor-intensive and psychologically taxing. The housewife is also on call 24 hours a day for years and years on end. However, the work of a housewife often goes uncompensated. So housewives do work. In fact, they work a lot. They often do not earn an income for the work that they do. So in this case, the 4 wives of each man are housewives in this example. Now let's simplify this visual and place everyone into their respective households so we can observe how this community is organized. So we are placing each individual according to their family names, which in this case will be a number. In this community, you will see the 1 family, the 2s, the 3s, and so on and so forth. You will also notice that the body of each child is the same color as their father, whereas the heads are the same color as their mother's color as we go on. To understand how this works, to understand how that works, how the genes are passed on, be sure to watch my video about polygyny and the gene pool. And now let's go to one of the polygynous families, the 1 family. You have the red man here who this time is polygynous, and you will see his blue wife. The first, Mrs. 1, along with the other wives, Mrs. and Mrs. and Mrs. 1. Let's keep it simple and just refer to them as Mr. and Quad Mrs. 1s. The word quad means a quantity of 4. Okay. So Mr. 1 is earning $100,000 per year, which is no different than Mr. A in the monogamous example. The quad Mrs. 1s, or the 4 women, are all housewives. They're not earning an income. So that is going to be $100,000 that is being divided by 5 different people. And once the money is split into 5 parts, it works out to be $20,000 per person each year. Let's fast forward and see what happens financially when each wife gives birth to a child. Here you are. Now there is a total of 4 children in the household. This means that Mr. 1's annual salary of $100,000 has gone from being divided by 5 different people to now being divided by a total of 9 people within this household. Let's do a bit of simple math here. $100,000 divided by 9 equals about $11,000 per person, $11,111.11 per person per year, just to be precise. Raising children requires the same resources regardless of whether they are born to monogamous parents or to polygamous parents of any ethnic, cultural, religious, etc. background. They still cost the same average of $275,000 per child from diapers to diploma, or from the time of their birth until the age of 18. They still cost the same amount of money that buys one car per year, or pays rent each month on an apartment, or pays for a tank of gas per day. This means that in the household of Mr. and Quad Mrs. Ones, there is a tremendous concern. They are already coming up $4,000 short by only having $11,000 per child, when they actually need $15,000 for each child. This shortage, the $4,000, is known as a deficit. Here's a brief calculation of the deficit. You see that $15,000 is required. However, only $11,000 is being provided in this example. That means that there is $4,000 that is needed, but it's not being provided by Mr. One for each of his 4 children with his wives. The $4,000 amount is the deficit in this example. Let's multiply this deficit by 4 children in the household, which equals to $16,000 each year of a deficit. What we are observing is a failure at meeting the average amount that is necessary to raise a child from infancy until they graduate high school. Since the majority of expenses with raising children revolve around food and shelter, this means that the quality of this will be compromised. Other aspects of their childhood and early adulthood will be compromised as well, including college or trade school tuition for the 4 children. This also means there is no extra money set aside to pay for the retirement years of the 5 cohabitating adults, or much later down the line to pay for their funeral expenses. We can't even begin to talk about the loss of opportunities for family vacations, extracurricular activities for the children, and so on and so forth. So let's move along and entertain what it's like for this neighborhood where each household is operating with an income of $100,000 annually, along with a deficit of $16,000. I'm about to sound a bit technical here for a moment, so let's get into it. First, we'll cover the income. With 5 houses in the neighborhood and each earning $100,000 in income, that equals to $500,000 of community dollars per year. In a decade, it will amount to $5 million, and after 2 decades, or the amount of time it takes to raise a child, roughly, this community would have generated $10 million. Now, that's going to be shared between 45 people, okay? Bear that in mind. Now we will look at what it means as far as an income deficit. That's $16,000 per house. Multiply that by 5 homes, which is $80,000 for the community each year. 10 years of a deficit equals $800,000, and 20 years will loom to a $1.6 million deficit, or money that should have been provided but was not. That's 5 households with 9 people residing in each, so that's a total of 45 people who are splitting $5 million over the course of 2 decades, or basically the childhood of each child, with a significant portion of those funds, about $1.6 million, as a deficit to the community. This means that there is not enough community money to put towards creating and maintaining shared spaces, like your roads, your bridges, and your schools, your libraries, your hospitals, and parks, and so on and so forth. As a result, communities that are polygynous tend to be less developed, less technologically advanced, and as a result tend to be less economically stable when compared to monogamous communities. We already see that one of the main concerns of polygamy is a lower distribution of resources to each person when compared to monogamous communities. Then tack on the deficits. So while the monogamous households are planning vacations and funding their children's college education, planning for their retirements and setting up their estates, the polygynous households are barely scraping by with enough food or adequate shelter. And so this is just a baseline visualization from an economic standpoint of how polygyny appears on paper. And it shows a deficit for each household. And in the examples that I use, it showed a $4,000 deficit. But in reality, the deficits per child are much higher. The overwhelming majority of men involved in polygynous relationships, either as husbands in plural marriages or as baby daddies with many baby mamas, they are incapable of generating the amount of resources that are necessary to properly care for their multitude of wives or baby mamas along with their children. So what does this all mean? Well, if you remember in the previous video, we covered how genetic issues, particularly gene pool shrinkage, will cause the children of polygamous families to migrate to monogamous communities as a remedy. Well, it works out that way economically as well. People who have polygamous problems often turn to monogamous communities as a remedy, and here's why. First, there are not enough people in polygynous homes producing incomes to contribute into their households. And of that income that is being produced, it has to be divided out into smaller portions. Sure, one can say that the women will just need to go to work and get a job and earn an income. Well, there are many reasons why this tends not to happen, ranging from social, legal, physical, and logistical reasons and logistical circumstances in the polygynous communities, which I'll cover in upcoming videos. So exactly, what are the polygynous communities, particularly in the Western nations, doing to tackle the income deficit, like the $4,000 deficit that their lifestyle creates? One of the common methods beyond child labor, selling their daughters into early or childhood marriage or even prostitution, and paying workers less than minimum wage, and so forth, is fraud. In the Netflix documentary, Keep Sweet, Pray, and Obey, it was revealed that a common method was for the father to make up a random name to place on the birth certificate while signing it at the child's birth. This will enable the mother to then go and obtain funds for shelter and food from social services. Another method is for the father of the child to refuse to sign the birth certificate, or for the mother of the child to fraudulently claim that she does not know who the father is. Also, another method is for the father to claim that he does not make enough money to pay for all of his children, while being unemployed or underemployed on purpose. This is problematic because it's not fair for the people in the monogamous community to actually have to pay for the consequences, financial or otherwise, stemming from the aftermath of those who consciously decided to be polygynous. And especially when those people tend to be highly resistant towards using the public health services that will provide free or discounted contraceptive methods. This concern needs to be addressed in a way that will, of course, ensure fairness for all. I believe that a viable solution would be that all children born to women who apply for assistance should be automatically DNA tested. A database needs to be created to keep track of who is siring or fathering children that are born to women who have to in turn beg for community resources to help feed and shelter them. This DNA database would not only track polygynous men potentially, but also those who commit intimate assaults on girls and women. Whenever a match is made exposing multiple children born to multiple women who is being sired or fathered by just one man, an investigation needs to take place, and then he, or in some cases she, will need to be held fully accountable. Just for further clarity, what I am saying is not an attempt to take away people's personal choices. If a group of women want to share one man and have children exclusively by him, then nothing or no one on this planet will stop it. Such is the case for some of Future's and some of Nick Cannon's baby mamas. What I am saying is that it's wrong for polygynous communities to leech monogamous resources, especially by deception. So far, Nick Cannon and Future have the net worth, at least on paper, to support their multitude of children. However, the average man who aspires to be polygynous does not have enough income to support his polygamous family. A real-life example of how de facto polygyny appears is the case of Desmond Hatchett. Desmond Hatchett is the father of approximately 30 children. And if that is not shocking enough, he even went to the court to request a reduction in the $1.49 amount of child support that he was paying. This means that there is potentially a deficit of $14,998.51 for at least one of his children. When we multiply that figure by 30 children, this leaves a deficit amount of $449,955.30 annually. As I mentioned earlier, either his name was left off of the birth certificate or he was claiming to not have the income necessary to properly care for his children in order to receive help from the public, the overwhelmingly monogamous public, to take care of his children. Again, I personally do not care what consenting adults choose to do. I'm not here to shame people for their choices. This video is not about shaming people and their decisions. What I am saying is that if members of a community push polygyny as a lifestyle, if they will not employ contraceptive methods, then they will need to 100% pay for the outcome of their decisions, and not us, the monogamous people. What also remains true as well, based on the visual modeling of polygyny as a social construct, it is economically, as well as genetically, unsustainable. So each crisis that the polygynous community faces will ultimately bring polygynous problems into monogamous communities as a remedy. One look at the crisis of migrants currently risking their lives while crossing the Mediterranean Sea, and you will see that most of them are coming from parts of the world where polygyny is practiced very heavily. One look at the smash and grab robberies that have taken place here in the United States lately will show that the majority of the criminals can be placed into communities where de facto polygyny is the norm, such as Blackistan. So this begs the question, why will they not take advantage of the free services that offer contraception? We will explore this and more in later videos, so be sure to stay tuned. That's all I have for now. Please be sure to subscribe and like the video, click the notifications bell so that you will know whenever I upload new content. Take care until next time.